Hello and welcome to this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast interview powered by Motors. Today, we're delighted to welcome back friend of the pod, Steve Young, Managing Director of ICDP, the International Automotive Retailing and After-Sales Consultancy. Steve is joining us for the latest in our regular chats about recent headlines and trends impacting the car retailing sector. So, as ever, Steve, plenty to talk about.
Yeah. Good morning, Curtis. Good morning, Phil. No, it's been another interesting month, hasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd say.
It's that usual year-end rush again, isn't it, of things taking place in the closing months of the year.
Well, it is then with but perhaps more extreme than normal. We don't normally get sort of multi-billion takeovers at the end of every year.
Yes.
And all the sort of chaos and uncertainty around electrification and so on. So, yeah, I think this counts as being different. Hopefully, it's not an indication that every year is going to be like this.
I don't think we could take it, could we?
I don't think we could.
No, my stress levels would go up trying to sort of keep all the plates in the air, I think.
Yes, yeah. I mean, speaking of that, it's great to have you back on, as always, Steve, and we always have a fantastic chat. But let's start off with ICDP's recently published top 50 dealer groups. We recently covered it, how well the UK dealers did in the rankings by turnover, with 5 of the top 10 positions, and how that's unlikely to be repeated as UK groups get snapped up by overseas buyers. I mean, what trend stood out to you as the most compelling this year in terms of the rankings?
I think there's a combination of things. I think you've already referred to the sort of dominance of the UK, but it's clear that dominance is reducing, and an element of that is transactional. So we look likely to have 2 of our big UK players, in addition to Jardine in the past, who will now be under US or North American control, but still effectively run out of the UK. But the other markets are extremely active, and it's the catching up from places like France, where they've moved on a lot in the last 5 years. Nordics, particularly Hedon, but further down the rankings, Belia is doing interesting things as well. Starting to get some movement in Germany. There's been a bit in Italy over the last few years as well. So even Spain, I was there earlier this year, and it's changing. So the thing that really gets to me is the fact that what we've used to in the UK is now actually becoming much more widespread. Dealer groups growing, expanding, and adopting a similar sort of model to the UK groups, with central operations and synergies that are really sought out, rather than a holding company that just happens to own 100 dealerships.
And Steve, we always like to talk about your blogs on the pod, and in a recent one, you raised an interesting point about how the progress of agency implementation is actually attracting more attention than electrification and dealer consolidation. What did you actually mean by this, and why do you think that is?
I think my point really was that agency has significant implications for dealers. Whether it goes well or goes badly, then there's still significant implications. But the effects of electrification and dealer consolidation are no less significant. But when I'm out and about, then pretty much the first thing that anybody asks, whether it's in the UK or elsewhere in Europe, even from further afield than that, is what's happening with agency. So it seems to be the one that's front of mind for everyone, but I think we shouldn't forget the fact that electrification and the whole sort of consolidation process is going to have as significant effect, I think, on the dealers as even a successful implementation of agency.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's certainly three themes that we talk about on the podcast, probably most weeks. In any given week, we'll talk about two, if not three of them. I mean, as we record this, I've just been looking at the press, and BMW look as though they're going to delay their agency, while Skoda are just about to introduce it. From your experience, are the OEMs actually being sort of relatively open about what their plans are? Those who haven't gone to agency, are the cards on the table?
The ones who haven't gone to agency are still keeping their cards close to their chest. I mean, they some of those who've said no or not now are actually we're not quite ready to announce anything yet, is a more accurate description. So we haven't seen the last of it, and I'm not certain that the troubles that some of the implementations are facing will actually change their mind. I think they'll obviously look and learn and hopefully apply that in their own implementations and have a smoother path. But I think the group of names that we already know will be joined by others in the coming year, and then potentially others still maybe further down the line who genuinely just sitting back and waiting and watching.
I mean, you talked about, obviously, in your blog, but we're walking into 2024 with the ZEV mandate, the rules of origin, which still hasn't been clarified whether they're deferring or it's remaining in play for 2024. This, electrification now, the autumn statement recently, the OBR have now said that the shift and volume of EV in the UK is going to be slower than they previously predicted. Do you think that agency is masking the bigger problem of the transition to electrification and the impact that will have on particularly the UK automotive sector?
I don't think it's masking it in the sense of there's things going on in the background that would be affected by agency or something like that. I think it's just that there's some dots to be joined up in terms of those three initiatives, or we could probably add another one or two others in as well if we thought about it. But in a way, they all have an impact on how dealerships are operated and the sorts of skills that you need, and also from the point of view of the manufacturers in terms of how they manage their networks and channels and so on. So they all do. So I mean, without sort of diving down into every sort of rabbit hole, the biggest issue with agency implementations, to date, has been that few have actually picked up on the fact that it is a change in the culture, both at the manufacturer level and the dealer level, and that affects the mix of people you have, or how you reward them, how you motivate them, and so on. But if you look at the electrification, then we know about the after sales effect, but the bigger issue, I think, that's still sort of lurking there waiting to jump out and bite us all is the fact that the pace of investment, and in the UK with the ZEV mandate, the regulatory drive is to increase sales actually ahead of consumer demand, and that's going to cause all sorts of issues which potentially affect the used car market at 3 or 4 years old, when all these cars are being pushed out or then defleeted into a private market that's not ready for them, or not ready for them at the prices that were assumed when those vehicles were originally leased. So, that again, potentially with some changes around the new car market and whether you're selling them or whether you're leasing them and where the manufacturer gets involved, is another sort of related change. And then obviously on the dealer consolidation, as there's larger and larger groups and maybe fewer groups sitting there in the middle, then that again is sort of a bit of a change, a move away from hands-on owner operators to more professionally managed groups with stronger focus on processes and systems and leveraging business information and so on. So I think that they all come together to say that the shape of the dealership in even 3-4 years time will be quite significantly different to what it is today. And I'm not sure that people are preparing for that, when actually the focus is much more immediate in terms of what's the commission going to be on my agency contract.
And remaining with, we talk about dealer and process and things like that. And in another blog, you were looking at the change in sales processes, which looked at the ongoing debate of physical versus online. But you made an interesting observation about how mall outlets, shopping centres, etc., could take an increased relevance, making them more than expensive flag wavers. What were you meaning by that? What were you trying to get the message across about on that one?
Well, I think if you go back 5 years, then people weren't convinced that mall outlets were anything other than as you say, expensive flag wavers. That it was purely a marketing concept. You didn't sell cars in malls. And that was sort of generally true, with the notable exception of what Simon Dixon did with Rockar originally at Bluewater, where they did make sales. But I think we've found sort of more evidence recently that if you look more closely at the customer journey, then they are generating sales. They may not be generating sales in the mall on the day, but customers are coming back into dealerships, not necessarily the dealership associated with operating the mall outlet, but they are coming back and buying cars. And the issue, appears to have been that the quality of leads tracking has not been good enough for us to actually trace the whole customer journey and what the eventual outcome was. People were investing in them because they felt it was a good thing to do, rather than because they had any hard evidence. But now we've got some hard evidence coming out, to the extent that, some of the mall outlets that we've had here, some of the mall outlets in France and Italy, for example, are actually really high performing if you track the eventual sale back to the first customer contact. So I think that the evidence is growing to say that they do have a place, as long as you manage them in an appropriate way. As long as one of the French operators that we spoke to said, as long as you fit into the rhythm of the mall, you understand that people are coming to the mall to go to the cinema or to buy some clothes or swap into a new iPhone. They've not come to buy a car. So you're not going to sell a car that day, but you can potentially sell a car if you handle that process well.
That's actually a really interesting point, Steve, that it was the lead tracking that really wasn't up to scratch. So leads were being generated, but not necessarily being tracked. And with that in mind, do you think if more OEMs are aware of how successful a mall outlet can be, that we're going to see more of them, especially from some of these new brands entering the UK for the first time?
Well, for the new brands, it's a pretty well established pattern that's how you try to sort of generate awareness, because you've got this huge footfall. Whatever it is, 25 or 30 million through Westfield at Stratford and Bluewater and the likes, and that footfall is great, and people sort of say, "Oh, what's that car?" and so on. So it's well established, and I think it will also have a role for the new entrants, as it did for Tesla originally. Now Tesla coming out of those mall outlets and into much more traditional dealerships, in some cases actually ex-dealerships of the other brands. So it's a transition step that I think for the new entrants in the main.
Yes. Yeah.
But I do think that when you look at the physical footprint today, which I can't remember whether we've talked about it on the podcast or not in the past, but we are, even in the UK, where we're relatively efficient by European standards in terms of new car sales per dealer, we are still well over dealered compared to what customers are prepared to do in terms of drive time. And if we're serious about taking distribution cost out, then we need to look at that much more seriously and be less focused on, oh, I can't close this dealership because I'll lose sales. We need to think about, well, how do we actually maintain sales? And in today's world, omni-channel world, what's actually required in terms of physical infrastructure, and it may well be that it includes mall outlets as part of that mix, not just to support the existing dealerships with the existing customer base, if you like, but also to try and attract new customers into the brand. So I think we will see more variety in general in physical networks, and within that, some long-term fixed commitments to mall outlets in sensible places.
And Steve, staying in the physical world, last weekend on the pod, we actually reported how Inchcape had culled its Bravo Auto multi-brand car supermarket operation, cutting it from 17 sites to eight sites in the UK. At the same time, we also reported how the independent Big Motoring World added 2 sites to its network as it increases its national reach. What's your view on why some franchise groups, certainly Inchcape, and we've reported on Peter Vardy as well, are struggling with this whole car supermarket concept? Is the model flawed from a sort of franchise dealer group perspective? What do you think?
Well, I think just commenting on Bravo Auto sort of briefly, we're seeing the tip of the iceberg with Inchcape in the UK nowadays, because they've become much more focused on their activities elsewhere, and Bravo Auto is something which they've rolled out pretty much on a global basis. Anywhere where there's Inchcape, then you'll find there's Bravo Auto, and they're competing in obviously quite different market environment. So perhaps Bravo Auto has had its time, or will be more restricted in the UK than in the past, but it doesn't mean that from an Inchcape point of view it's dead. In terms of the general problems with Bravo Auto or Peter Vardy, then we do have this challenge with restricted supply of used cars, and we're going to have that for another 3 years because of the supply shortages that we had over the previous 3 years. There is this sort of structural dip in the volumes that will come through, and when you've got restricted supply, then that's going to make it tough for anyone who's operating independently and needs volume, because all of these businesses have been built on the back of needing a volume. And you could look at some of the other independents, even Kazoo and so on as well. They need to source cars in a market where the cake is shrinking, and the franchise dealers have got an advantage in terms of getting the cars that are coming off lease from the manufacturers and coming off PCPs and so on. So that makes it challenging for them in general to maintain the overhead, and that was Peter Vardy's reason why he pulled out. I'm sure it's part of what sits behind Bravo Auto. If you've got restricted supply and it's a decent quality car, would you not sell it through the franchised dealer channel and try and get a bit more of a premium for that? Particularly if you're a multi-brand group and you can move it from the Audi dealer to the BMW dealer or whatever, rather than put it through a channel where you're probably having to be a bit more competitive on price. You'll maximize the profit. I think Pete Waddell's force of nature, isn't he? So
he certainly is. Yes.
Choose your words carefully there.
Yeah, well, he manages to buck the trend, but
he does,
and that's that's good on him. But I mean, I think he came out of the womb, probably selling used cars. I spoke to a CEO of a sort of leading dealer group and one who's extremely strong on used cars recently, and because we were asking very much this question, what holds franchise dealers back? And he just said it's got to be in your DNA. That you can't just play with used cars. It's either in your DNA or it's not. Was his view. It's a bit of sort of nature versus nurture, I suppose. And you really do need to be committed. And I think that's the secret of Pete Waddell, but it's also what sits behind businesses like Arnold Clark and so on.
That's actually a really good point, Steve, because if you look at the Sytner model, they've got a very successful used car supermarket business, but that's because they bought an independent one. They bought the car people, and certainly from my understanding, it's more or less run as an independent business within Sytner because they understand what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think there's the danger in any sort of transaction like that you buy a good business and you wreck it because you then put it underneath the sort of the corporate sort of blanket of processes and thinking and responsiveness and so on. And that's not just true about car dealers. It's true about I don't know, IT startups or any other thing you might want to think about, coffee shops or whatever. So I think if you're going to run a standalone business, then I think it really does have to have its own focus and some degree of independence, and inevitably that then also means to some extent some competition between the channels. You can't sort of give the used car business the sort of authority to go off and run the business to the best way that they can on one hand, and then say, but oh, by the way, every time you get a premium car that fits within the approved use programs, then we'll have that. Thank you very much.
Yes.
We'll sell it through the franchise dealerships.
Yeah, they can't stop themselves.
I've seen it and experienced it. It's exactly what happens. It's it's good whilst it's one way, and you saw that through the pandemic of shortage of supply, that those that had the supermarkets and the franchise operators, when stock became a problem, the supermarkets got cut off because the franchises needed used cars to supplement the new car shortage, and the supermarkets element suffered.
Yeah, and in the short term that makes sense, and you probably make more profit, or you should make more profit selling it under the approved program. If you price the premium experience in, you should make more money that way. But you're also devaluing, if you like, on the balance sheet. You're making the money on the P&L through selling it at a better price through the franchise channel, where you're devaluing the balance sheet because your used car supermarket is withering.
Yeah, I mean, say we do. I think we said right at the start. I mean, we're end of the year now, and there's so much happening, and obviously the conversations, and I know you'll be the same, Steve. What's happening next year? What's 2024 gonna look like? And there's so many. There's more questions than answers out there at the minute, unfortunately. But as you say, it's certainly a significant close to 2023, and I think everybody's expecting more of the same going into next year, and whether that's consolidation and things like that. So I say it's fascinating, and those that are listening today, then please do check out Steve's blogs, where you'll find also the top 50 guide to Europe's biggest dealers, which I would recommend having a look at. It's fascinating content and really eye-opener of who's operating where and the size and scale of some of these businesses as well. So they're all available on the ICDP website, which is icdp.net, or check out Steve on LinkedIn, and you tend to share everything anyway, Steve. So, if you're not subscribed to Steve's blogs, then I would highly advise you to subscribe to Steve's blogs. They're always insightful and thought-provoking and interesting. So please do that.
We don't share everything, Philip.
I know that.
We've got to keep the best back for the members.
Yeah. There's a lot more in there than yes. But what you do share is good and useful and insightful. But yes, there is a lot more to ICDP than we do talk about. But
but I think to the prospects for 24. I mean, it's still a great industry, isn't it? I mean, you're never short of something to do.
I think it's keeping you busy, isn't it, Steve?
Yeah, definitely.
It is indeed.
Okay, well, that's all for now. Many thanks for joining us for this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast powered by Motors. Thanks once again to Steve for joining us and sharing his views on what's shaping the dealer sector. Phil and I are back with the headlines on Saturday. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.